What's going on, you guys? So I'm sure everybody's heard the news by now that Terence Crawford has retired. 5-division champion, 3-time undisputed, 4-time lineal, right? Retired at the top spot of the sport, the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, right? Finally decided to call it quits. And since then, we've seen a lot of guys come out, fighters, and say congratulations and, give him his props and his respect for everything he's done in the sport. And I've seen a couple people now have the conversation of where Terence Crawford places in the all-time list, right? And now that he's retired, I think it's time to revisit this conversation. I touched on it a little bit probably prior to the Canelo fight, and everybody prior to the Canelo fight, assuming that Crawford won, the debate was, is he a top 3, top 5 all-time fighter? And I would say he's much more than that. I think he is literally the greatest fighter of all time. Now, that may not be a surprise to some people who follow my channel. They know I'm very high on Crawford, but to others, this may be, kind of crazy to hear, because there's a lot of great fighters throughout the history of the sport, right? Guys like Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Mayweather, Muhammad Ali, the list goes on and on. But if you really look at Terence Crawford's career, it's as close to flawless as it can get, right? Retires undefeated, 5-division champion, 3-time undisputed. Nobody's done that. Nobody's accomplished 3-time undisputed, right? Never no close calls, no controversial fights, right? Unless you're an absolute idiot and you think Madrimov actually won the fight, which there are people out there that do believe that. And I think guys like on the DAZN podcast or DAZN commentary crew, like Sergio Mora, Chris Mannix, and Todd Grisham, those guys are fucking idiots, but they may have convinced some boxing fans that Madrimov was a lot more competitive than really he's shown. Aside from landing occasional right hands and throwing 1,000 feints, he really didn't do much in the whole entire fight. The most rounds I feel like you could give Madrimov in that fight were 4 rounds. And I'm just being honest. But no close calls, no controversy, no knockdowns, right? He was completely dominant throughout his whole entire career. From 135 all the way up to 168. Capturing the title at 135, beating Ricky Burns, right? To pick up his first world title. Now, before I go into his resume, this is the only thing that people are going to say when they start having this conversation of GOAT, right? With Terence Crawford. They're going to be like, well, his resume is weak. He didn't fight anybody. He didn't do this or do that. Now, I think I've touched on this more than a handful of times about resume, dude. It feels like I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm going to touch on it because, like I mentioned, there's going to be a bunch of dummies in the comment section or people that watch this video that think, man, his resume sucks. Well, Ricky Burns was a 3-weight world champion, right? I don't know too many 3-weight world champions that are complete bums, right? He beat up on Gamboa at 135 also. And Gamboa was a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter at the time, undefeated. In fact, I think he had the same exact record as Crawford at the time they fought. It was like 23-0 with like 16 knockouts, right? Former gold medalist, so he had a great amateur pedigree, was a world champion, and had a lot of buzz behind him, right? Top 10 pound for pound. They don't just give that out to anybody. He had Floyd Mayweather and the whole Mayweather Boxing Club backing him. He had 50 Cent as his promoter. He had a lot of buzz. A lot of people forget, but end up stopping him when that fight won Fight of the Year. But regardless, it was a great fight. He ended up getting him out of there. Moves up to 140, wipes out that whole entire weight class, beat the guys like Victor Postal, who was a feared 140-pounder. A lot of people don't give Postal respect. I mean, at that time, Postal was looked at similar how Bakram Murtazaliev is looked at now at 154. Just a boogeyman. Eastern European guy, beat up on Lucas Matisse, stopped him, right? Danny Garcia wanted no parts of Victor Postal at all. So Crawford fought him, right? Wiped out the whole entire weight class. Beat the guys along the way like John Molina and, Hank Lundy, Deary John, who these guys were all right. These guys weren't world beaters by any means, right? Beat up on Ndongo for what it's worth. Hey, guess what? Ndongo was a unified champion, and he went to different people's backyards and took their titles, right? Some people are just stupid, but Thomas Delorme, again, an all right fighter. He had a lot of backing behind him with HBO. He was a puncher that came down to 140. He was originally a 147 pounder. But at the time, these guys that I'm listing, a lot of people look at them now and, you know, their careers didn't pan out the way that they maybe thought. But a lot of these guys that I'm mentioning were pretty good fighters along the way. Some of them elite, but, you know, through the course of their career, it just didn't turn out that way for them, right? Guys like Felix Diaz, for example. Felix Diaz was a former gold medalist, you know, young, hungry contender, right? The only controversial fight he had was against Lamont Peterson, and a lot of people thought Felix Diaz won that fight, but HBO had a lot of backing with Felix Diaz, and they thought, hey, this might be the next best thing. He might be a future world champion, you know, but Crawford destroyed him and pretty much ruined his career, and we never really saw too much of Felix Diaz after that, right? But moving on to 147, wiped out that whole entire weight class, stopped everybody in the weight class that he fought, right? Beat up guys like Jeff Horn, who bullied Pacquiao, beat Pacquiao, right? A lot of people argue that fight was close. It was close, but I thought Jeff Horn won the fight. But a lot of Pacquiao fanboys just have a tough time swallowing that pill that he got beat by Jeff Horn. He got bullied and beat up by Jeff Horn. But Terence Crawford, first fight of the weight class, stops Jeff Horn, stops Jose Benavidez Jr., who, yeah, he got shot in the leg, but the guy was young, hungry, undefeated contender. Beat up Mean Machine, young, hungry, undefeated contender. Beat up Amir Khan. Beat up Kell Brook, Sean Porter, and one that, you know, David Avanesian wasn't a world beater. He beat Josh Kelly, you know. Some of these guys on any given night, if you're not prepared, you didn't have a great training camp, you know, these are guys that could beat you, that are dangerous. You know, at the world level, everybody is dangerous, right? But I was there live for the David Avanesian fight, and that was tight. Seeing him get the knockout and stuff like that. It was in Omaha. It was really fun. But regardless, he ends up putting a cherry on top and stopping Earl Spence in a mega fight, right? A 50-50 fight. You know, going into it, a lot of people didn't know who was going to win. It was a very highly anticipated fight. Right? Both of these guys, Crawford and Spence, were both top 5 pound-for-pound fighters. And Crawford beat the brakes off of him, pretty much retired him. We haven't seen Earl Spence since, right? Moves up to 154. Beats arguably the best guy at the division at that time in Israel Madrimov, right? And like I mentioned, some people want to say it was controversial. They're just idiots. But I had that fight. At the most, you can give it 8 rounds to 4 for Crawford. But handled him well, but got some criticism because he didn't stop him. You know, he went 11 straight fights in a row where he stopped every single opponent, but he didn't stop Madrimov. He hurt him multiple times throughout the fight, but Madrimov is no slouch, right? Great amateur pedigree, young, hungry, undefeated champion. But nonetheless, going into that, or after that fight, a lot of people felt, hey, man, 168 is going to be too much for Terence Crawford. He's not going to be able to compete with Canelo. He's too big. And did you see the way he fought Madrimov? He didn't look great. And a lot of people are just dummies and really believe that. Just because, like I mentioned, DAZN's commentary crew had y'all tricked. I knew very well going into that fight that Crawford was going to win, but some people didn't. And that's all right. But becomes 3-time undisputed, washing Canelo Alvarez. And you're an idiot if you think that fight was competitive. You're an idiot if you thought Madrimov was competitive, but you're even more of an idiot if you thought the Canelo fight was competitive. But that was like a perfect way to end a career, is beating Canelo Alvarez. There's no bigger fight. There's no bigger accomplishment, you know, for all the marbles, undisputed, for legacy, everything, the money. Everything was involved in that fight, and he came out on top, man. And you just got to give it to Crawford, dude. Like, the dude defied all odds, went against so much criticism throughout his career, and, you know, came out the sport on top, all of his faculties, you know, probably the most dominant career. And there's always debates, and before he retired, there was this debate of you know, oh, he's not even the best of his era. Yes, he is. And a lot of people throw this Alexander Usyk thing out here, and I need to address it real quick before we move on. Alexander Usyk is a good fighter, but people bash on Crawford's resume and say, oh, he fought a car wreck Spence, he fought old Canelo, he fought a Sean Porter who was halfway in, halfway out. You know, he didn't listen to his daddy. He fought Kell Brook, who was broken. Jose Benavidez had one leg, all this shit, right? But you don't ever hear anything about Alexander Usyk fighting a fat gypsy who arguably lost to an MMA fighter before their first fight, right? Who came off 3 wars with Deontay Wilder, arguably the biggest puncher in the history of the sport, right? And before that, he was like 500 pounds and on dope. Like, people forget, but they want to give him so much credit for beating a fat Tyson Fury. And then beating a robot Anthony Joshua who got stopped by fat pudgy Andy Ruiz. Like, what are you talking about? He beat up Derek Chisora and he beat up Dubois, right, who has no heart at all, right? And arguably he should have beat Usyk if they ruled that body shot a real knockdown, which it was on the belt line. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't a low blow, but whatever, right? And he struggled at cruiserweight against Breedis, right? That fight ended in a split decision. Controversy. The fact that he had to run it back with multiple people during his heavyweight campaign just lets me know that he wasn't as dominant as Terence Crawford. What rematches has Terence Crawford had to run back? Or what fights has he had to rematch, right? None. They've never been competitive. Never. So that's that. I mean, no disrespect to Usyk, but it's just his fan base that I can't stand. It's not Usyk himself as a fighter, because I think he's a quality dude, but come on. Usyk isn't the best of this era, right? But if you go in all time and you start comparing, you know, some of the legends of the sport to Terence Crawford, like Sugar Ray Robinson gets this, you know, #1 all-time fighter, you know, because, you know, he's nostalgic and it was like back in the 50s and stuff. But how I look at Sugar Ray Robinson, you know, and Terence Crawford is how I look at like Babe Ruth and Ohtani, right? Babe Ruth, in the era that he played, was the best, right? Without a doubt. He changed the game, right? Nobody was hitting homers like Babe Ruth back then, right? He was the first person to do that. But how many people in that era can see a 100-mile-per-hour fastball up and in and turn on it and hit it out of the stadium? Nobody. Have you ever seen Babe Ruth take batting practice? He's Happy Gilmoreing every swing, popping up. There's no way he would be able to compete in today's times. I don't even know if he'd be able to make rookie ball in today's time for baseball. And same goes for Sugar Ray Robinson, man. I think he probably gets his ass whooped by an all-right lightweight now. Terence Crawford would have beat the shit out of him. But no disrespect to Sugar Ray, because he's a pioneer of the sport. But I'm just being honest, right? When you start talking about like Floyd Mayweather, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, he competes with every one of those guys, if not beats them all. Duran too, at 135, right? The difference between these guys is, one, Crawford never lost. I know Floyd Mayweather didn't lose, right? There's no controversy ever in this dude's career. He was completely dominant. Some of these guys lost because, you know, Father Time caught up to him, or maybe they just lost. Like Duran lost to Leonard, and Leonard lost to Duran, and Hearns lost to Leonard and Hagler, and so on and so forth, right? There was not too much separation between some of these guys, but with Crawford's era, you can argue, hey, some of these guys weren't Tommy Hearns level caliber, blah, 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 but he can't control his era at the same time. But that just goes to show you that maybe it's a little bit of the Roy Jones effect. It's not, you know, him fighting nobodies. It's just him making look like everybody he fought was a nobody. Crawford was just that dominant. I don't think there's anybody in the sport that he couldn't beat. I think he beats a Tommy Hearns. I think he beats a Sugar Ray Leonard, Floyd Mayweather, right? And Floyd Mayweather was the only guy to retire undefeated out of these names that I just mentioned. But like I said, controversy, Crawford never had it. Floyd Mayweather even had it, right? Floyd Mayweather arguably lost to Jose Luis Castillo. When I first watched that fight, I thought he lost. I'll have to go back and rewatch it, but he beat him in the rematch, right? And some people may argue Maidana. I don't think Maidana beat him. I think a lot of people are just Floyd Mayweather haters, but I would say that fight was competitive. Maidana, you know, made it an ugly fight, maybe even a dirty fight, and that was the only way to even make it competitive with the Floyd Mayweather. But I have Crawford as the all-time greatest fighter ever, and that's just my opinion. I mean, everybody's subject to their own opinion, right? I'm not going to be mad by someone saying, oh, Mayweather's the greatest, or Sugar Ray Robinson's the greatest, right? I don't think anybody in that time frame or a time period can really be considered the greatest, because sports evolve, you know. This just reminds me, I remember watching this guy's video, I think it was Boxing Realist, talking about how he compares Crawford to Rocky Marciano, and that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Rocky Marciano? Are you freaking serious? Rocky Marciano would probably get his ass whipped by the average middleweight today. They're not comparable at all. The skill level is massive. The difference, that is. The skill difference is massive. And who the fuck did Rocky Marciano beat? An old Joe Louis? Like, there's no way if you put Rocky Marciano in the modern day heavyweights, he's even competitive. Like I mentioned, I think the average middleweight today whoops the shit out of Rocky Marciano. So it's just disrespectful, and that just goes to show you that there's guys out there that just hate on Crawford for no reason. To even compare him to a Rocky Marciano is absolutely crazy, but it's whatever. But I got Crawford all-time greatest. Everybody's subject to their own opinion, but that's just mine. But now that he's retired, let me know what you guys think. Where do you place not Rocky Marciano, fuck. Where do you place Terence Crawford on the all-time list? Do you think he's the best of this era? Do you think he's the greatest of all time? Top 5? Let me know what you guys think. Hate, like, comment, subscribe.